for like another year.
Welcome to the Polk County Emergency Operations Center. A lot of familiar faces. We appreciate your time. We're going to try to make the most efficient use of your time. We've got an hour planned and a lot packed into there. I will try not to talk super fast to the point that you can't understand me, but if there are clarifications or questions that you have, we'll try to save some time at the end, or you're welcome to stick around as long as you'd like, and we'd be happy to talk with you individually. My name's AJ Munn. I'm the Emergency Management Director here. We'll have a slide here in just a bit with the rest of our staff. So Dutch, if you wouldn't mind going forward for me, please. Just a quick note that we will have this recording available to all of you. So some people I know like to take notes. Others of you have much better memory than I do and are able to just retain it. But either way, no need to take furious notes. You're welcome to download our recording at the end or share it with others within your organizations if you'd like. And we'll share that link probably early next week when we get that uploaded. Here's what we're going to try to cover today. A little bit of background and governance. I know emergency management is not the most well-known in terms of how we're organized, so we want to touch on that. And I know most of you probably have a sense of that, but hopefully it's just a little bit of a refresher for you. And then we'll cover through some of our mission areas of the preparedness, response, recovery, mitigation, and then wrap up with some really exciting stuff on our budget. I know that's why you're all here. So we'll cover some numbers at the end, as well as talk about our relationship with the 911 Service Board. So that's where we're headed. Before we get going, I want to thank our commission chairperson and for his leadership and guidance. Chief John Takip with the Des Moines Fire Department has been our chair for the past several years. So Chief, if there's any comments you'd like to make?
Sure. I won't speak very long. I just wanted to, one, say thank you for taking the time to do this. Those of you in the room and those of you who are here virtually or will watch us in recorded form. I would just highlight a couple of things I hope you can take away from this. One, wherever you're from, the return on investment will be interesting and important and significant. I'm very proud of this agency. I think we have the best emergency management staff in the state, bar none. The other thing is, the things that AJ is going to talk about are not theoretical. This is actually how we get things done collectively when there is a flash flood or there's a pandemic or there's a whatever it is. And the other thing I would impress upon people is we all have things that we recognize that are emergencies in our own jurisdictions. And a lot of times we can solve those kinds of emergencies with agencies that are within our city, or perhaps a phone call to a resource that or something you need. But a disaster is very different from that. And it's not always that the plane full of hazardous materials crashes into the hospital that is next to the puppy store kind of disaster. But it could be a flash flood or an otherwise not huge tornado that compromises more than one city's ability just to pick up trash. And all of a sudden, the elected officials from 3 communities need to figure out in about 12 hours how we're going to take care of all of our regular trash, all of our debris from the tornado, and how we keep all the regular business going. This is the agency, and these are the partners that help you do that. And they're available to answer questions, not just today, but all the time. And that's one of I think the customer-friendly nature of EMA in Polk County is one of its greatest assets. So I'll end with that. So thank you.
Yeah, that's exactly what we strive for. So if we're not meeting your expectations on any of that, we'd like to hear from you today, tomorrow, whenever it happens. We're huge believers in the after-action reporting process, whether that's a formal process after a disaster, or just an informal phone call saying, hey, this could have gone better. I didn't expect that to happen. We need to do less of this or more of that. So thank you, Chief, for your leadership in the comments. The balance of the executive committee, you can see here on the screen, we have a 5-member executive committee. Sheriff Schneider with Polk County Sheriff's Office is our vice chair. Chief Jim Clark with Johnston is an at-large member. Chief Chris Scott with the West Des Moines Police Department. I don't believe he was able to make it here today. Is one of our newer members, along with Chief Jared Ogborn from Altoona Fire Department. So really lean on them for the advice week to week. So they get a lot of phone calls and emails from me to making sure that well, basically just provide that advice, sounding board. So it's greatly appreciated. The Emergency Management Commission, the organization in the state of Iowa, and by the way, each state is a little bit unique. So I know we have some people that have served in capacities in other states, and it may be done one way there. And you know, when you've seen one, you've probably seen one state, quite honestly, with the different ways emergency management is organized across our nation. But here in Iowa, back in the 60s, they decided to make it a regional structure where the mayors of all of the cities are represented from the Board of Supervisors and the county sheriff would form that governance committee known as the Emergency Management Commission. And that's what we've worked under for several decades. I believe there are some real benefits in doing that, but it also comes with some challenges of making sure that we are serving diversity of communities and their capacities. But it's we go all the way back to the civil defense days. And we're really here to serve and facilitate the preparedness of the community, coordinating and supporting during response activities, and then helping the community recover. And so that takes on a lot of different methods and ways of going about it. And it's a huge dependence upon partners. And you probably see, probably every email you get from me leads in with that partner. And we really are appreciative of the true partnership, the ability to have that relationship and communicate with one another. It's really what makes it all work, as Chief DeKip mentioned a moment ago. So here's our team. Chief, I appreciate the words you had. I'm also very appreciative of the team we have here. And this is just in order of tenure. I've been here since 2004. And next up would be Cameron Stufflebeam. Cameron, as our program assistant, does a lot of our logistics, fleet management, safety analysis. And so during COVID, processed literally millions of pieces of PPE through a system that Cameron helped design and execute. So Cameron's our logistics facilities person. Tracy is our 911 coordinator. We'll talk about 911 towards the end, so a little bit more to come on that. Tracy's been with us also since 2016. Patty Nordmeyer. Patty is the glue that keeps us all together. Schedules, rooms, administration, finance, grants, payroll, insurance, all that stuff. So Patty does a great job for us and has been with us for since 2019. Our newest member, the guy hiding back here, maybe see the top of his head. There's probably a joke in there somewhere, but I'll save him that. Dutch Geisinger is our deputy director. He may be the newest member of the team, but Dutch and I have known each other for a long time. I don't know, probably since 2005, 4, 3, somewhere in there, early 2000s. Dutch has a great experience with Federal Department of Homeland Security, U.S. Department of Homeland Security, working with a nonprofit called Safeguard Iowa Partnership. Is with the state of Iowa. That's where we met. Has law enforcement background and military. So appreciate not only Dutch, but everybody on our team. We do have, you see there that on the far right, we do have a vacancy right now. That position opening vacancy closes, or the application period, I should say, closes on Friday. So if you know somebody that is interested in emergency management, has a spirit for networking and problem solving, we'd like to see their application. So just a quick plug for that. The link down at the bottom, that's you can go and look at our bios. I don't know how exciting that is for you, but if you wanted to know a little bit more about us, that link will take you there. Our mission is really all about helping people and organizations be successful. And that takes on a lot of different ways that we're just pitching in and helping solve problems. It takes a lot of that understanding and listening first, and then working in a variety of ways to apply a number of different tools to help whoever that is. If it's a person, it's a family, be successful hopefully before the disaster. Our goal is always to have somebody prepare so that they are resilient and able to withstand whatever that emergency or disaster is, but also help them through the response and recovery missions as well. You can see there are actions. I'm not going to go through those, but that's really what gets us by every single day is providing that servant leadership, supporting, helping those in need, connecting and unifying. It's probably what we work hardest at, just making sure that we understand what the needs are, understand who all of the members on the team are that may be able to help that particular problem, connecting them. We do a lot of, hey, I can't do that, but I know who does really well, and making those connections. At the end of the day, we're all on the team, and unifying, integrating, collaborating is the way to solve a lot of these complex problems. And at the end of the day, we know we're going to be judged by how successful others are in doing their mission. If we can help out a little bit or a lot, we're here and standing by and ready to do that. I'm not going to go through all of this, but to give you a chance to look at some highlights of Iowa Chapter 29C. Super exciting reading. I know that's probably what you're all going to do when you leave here is crack open the Iowa Code. But if you are interested in knowing, geez, is that within their mission? Is that within their scope? Why are they doing that? Is there an explanation of why they're involved in a certain activity or not? You'll probably find that in either the Code of Iowa Chapter 29C or on the right-hand side. It's covered by that a little bit, but it's Iowa Administrative Code Section 605. Those are kind of the program areas on the right-hand side, starting with the hazard analysis, going all the way through administration. Those are the things that we are responsive to. The commission, we report on those. Our agendas on commission meetings and executive committee meetings are providing reports on each of those every month and every quarter for the full commission. So you have an understanding of what we're working on, or giving us feedback on how we can improve in any of those program areas. Our bylaws, which are probably equally as exciting to read as Iowa Code, but that lays out sort of the structure of the commission, its executive committee, what my left and right boundaries are as a director of the agency, my responsibilities to the commission, the frequency of our meetings, and all of that stuff. So if any of those were a question, or you have interest in finding out a little bit more about that, that link at the bottom will take you to our bylaws. So go ahead, Dutch, to the next one. Thank you. One of the reasons I touched on that organizational structure that you saw a few slides ago that talked about emergency management being a regional governance structure is involving all of the cities, the county together. And we have a great situation here in Central Iowa where our capabilities and capacities relative to many of our neighbors in the Midwest are pretty expansive. And when you add all of those gray polygons together, it is really, really, really high functioning, high capability when we all can work together. There's really not a lot that we can't do when we all come together. And we've seen that through flash floods. We've seen that through river floods. We've seen that through planned events where we all come together to, excuse me, to make sure that we're successful in accomplishing the objectives that are put forward. Those principles on the right-hand side, those are the things we strive to do day in and day out, to recognize that we're working within all phases, before, during, and after a disaster, that we are risk-driven, that we're making decisions not based on what we find interesting as an agency, but really where the risk assessment leads us. And so that also has an impact on our planning, training, and exercise activities, our resource management, that we are collaborative, coordinated. Those are kind of in line with that whole partnership and relationship that I keep talking about, that we remain flexible. We know that a solution to a problem 5 years ago may be a little bit different the next time it happens. Our community changes. So we need to remain flexible. And at the end of the day, we need to be accountable, professional emergency managers, and that public stewardship and understanding that the residents of our communities hold us to those high standards. Again, a lot of information on here that you're welcome to look at. We'd encourage you to take a look at. But our point here is that there are several different capabilities. We define those in certain mission areas: prevent, protect, mitigate, respond, and recover. There are three. It's a little bit hard to read, especially if you're in the back of the room, but those top three white boxes, it says planning, public information and warning, and operational coordination. Those cut through all of those 5 mission areas. And there are a number of different activities that are done, and many of which we do none of. And the reason I say that we do none of that is that many of you sitting in this room are the people at on the front lines of doing those things. So if you look at things like cybersecurity, I know very little about cybersecurity, but again, if that's a capability that needs to be brought to bear on a situation, that we know who we can help bring in and help support. And so you can go throughout, pick and choose any of those lists up there. It's many of you in this room that are doing those things day in and day out, and we're simply that orchestra conductor that gets to bring you all together and work together. So the folks behind me here love when I bring up these analogies. They probably have a tally mark someplace in the office of how many I bring up on a day-to-day basis. But if you want to humor me through this analogy, is one of an orchestra conductor, where the artists that are in the orchestra are the professionals, the experts. They're the ones that are doing the hard work. They're practicing every day. And we're simply there to make sure that we have a venue to bring them together. And as Wikipedia, I'm not sure that's the highest quality research I could have done, but that's what Wikipedia told me is the job of an orchestra conductor is to unify performers, set a tempo, make sure that the expectations and preparation are clear. I like this next one. It's listen critically. And I think that's what we're always trying to do better, is to listen to what those needs are before we jump in and try to solve a problem for somebody else when we might not really understand what it is that you're all doing on a day-to-day basis. And so we have some processes that we are able to learn from you what those are. And that's the planning, training, and exercise phases of our mission. I throw the word capability around quite a bit. And really a capability requires these 6 things that you see on the board to really be a truly capable function or activity. So number 1, it's having the relationships, having an organization that can bring us together, that we understand and all agree to, that we have a plan, our expectations of what we want the future state to look like, how we want to identify our objectives and what we want to accomplish, eventually putting that in writing, the training, we'll talk about that in a second, being able to exercise or practice those things, to have the equipment, supplies, and information around us to be able to execute it, and the ability to communicate within that network or that organization. So if any one of these disappears, the capability is diminished greatly. And so we work hard on each of these 6 areas to really make sure that we have a full capability in whatever those areas are. I used cybersecurity as an example before, but there were, I think, 32 other capabilities in that list, all of which depend upon you and your partnership, not just with us, but with each other. Planning is kind of where I came up through. Some of my background is in emergency planning, and some people love it and some people absolutely hate it. But I love it. I think it's just a matter of bringing people together and getting them to talk about what they expect to happen. And once we get in a room and talk about, hey, what do you want to happen and what do you want to happen, we can start to merge those things together. And when we realize that there's overlap or that there are gaps, then we work to solve those. And that's really just all it is, the planning process, the who, what, when, where, and why. And when we get through that process, when we're in the middle of that process, we're building relationships. And the number one thing we're doing was we're building trust with each other. And so you can see there the other benefits that I believe are part of the planning process, about defining roles and responsibilities. All that stuff is important. right there at the bottom, it's simply a pathway to agreed upon vision of the future. And whether that future is 5 minutes from now, or 5 days from now, or 5 years from now, that planning process is critical to making sure that we are fulfilling as many of your expectations as possible. A long list of emergency support functions. Again, it'd be great if you all wanted to stay here for 5 or 6 hours until I probably lost my voice talking about some of this stuff. But this is how we take a really complex, multi-volume, like I'm older, so I remember the old set of encyclopedias, right? And that's simply what these are, is a collection of similar capabilities kind of put together so that we have a manageable number of functions, and we can apply these functions in a countless number of combinations because of how modular they are. So if there's a need for something, we can pull that volume off the shelf of the encyclopedia set. And if it's not necessary, we can leave it set right there. And so every disaster is going to have a different combination of functions and capabilities that have to come together. And this provides that menu and some documentation of what we have agreed to do at some point in the past and apply that in the future. Without training, training is basically the key to be able to execute the plan. And so here we're building knowledge, skills, and abilities. As you are well aware, the names and faces change frequently. There's new and better techniques that emerge, new equipment. All of this stuff is a dynamic environment. There's a number of formal classes that we have taken, we have hosted, many of you have taken. And there's other, I think, less formal things that we do that continue to build relationships, but also build the knowledge, skills, and abilities. And that's something we started in early 2022 with our Lunch and Learn program. So basically once a month, usually it was like the 3rd or 4th week of the month on a Tuesday or Wednesday, we kind of had to be more clear after the second one. It wasn't Lunch and Learn, it was bring your own lunch and learn. You'll see our budget in a second and you might understand why. So I wish we had the resources to really provide a lunch, but we love it when people show up with the brown bag or do whatever. And but most importantly, get in the room together, understand these things better. You can see there, working with the media, we brought in people from TV stations, the newspaper, we brought in PIOs from many of your organizations that shared their experience. We did the same thing with damage assessment. We've brought in people that have been there and done that, learned some lessons, shared that with people to say, hey, if you're doing this next time, we would never do this again. Or I wish we would have known X, Y, Z and apply that to the next time. And so that holds true with all of the items in that list, from search and rescue, mental health resources. I know that was a very eye-opening piece for us. Special event planning. We're getting a lot of practice at that, right? We're getting better every time, but a community of this size with what's happening here in the metro area, super exciting. But it also requires a lot of behind the scenes stuff, which many of you and us work together to make sure it's a safe event. So I don't know, Captain, we saw each other, it's like, it might be the 3rd time today at different special event planning things. So it's happening all around us almost every day. Active threat, reunification, just a quick word here. Dutch has done some great work working with the school districts, working with locations like Hope Lutheran Church, DMAC,
State Fairgrounds.
Sorry?
State Fairgrounds.
State Fairgrounds, the AEA on doing regional reunification. So we have 162, I think, public school buildings in the metro in Polk County. And if every one of those school buildings had to come up with their own reunification plan, it's likely that we would have conflicts and misunderstandings about which entity is doing what, and they do it a little bit differently here and there, and that just adds to the potential confusion. So we want them all engaged, but how can we work on a regional reunification system so that no matter where it happens, hopefully it never happens, but if it does, that we have a system that we all understand and we can lean on each other, that we can use certain locations that we have exercised at, that we have trained the people that can provide that assistance. Because what we've heard from a lot of after actions, we had 3 of them report out in a symposium a couple weeks ago. The Lakeland, Florida shooting, the Joplin tornado, and Las Vegas. Thank you. And they all said, like, don't depend upon your own folks. If you're involved in that shooting, those killings, all of that ugliness, you're probably the least prepared to also be doing reunification. So lean on others that you have a relationship with, but are not directly involved to help do that. So we're taking that advice on the reunification process. So you'll probably hear more from us as we move that forward. We have tremendous partners in the National Weather Service. Cameron, I think, has probably 2 or 3 phone calls or radio transmissions with them every single day. It's not enough good things that I could say about the National Weather Service and the support that they provide us here in Iowa. And then, of course, public-private partnerships. I know that Jay Knox is on the line in virtual land here, but with Safeguard Iowa Partnership, access to hundreds of private businesses, industry, and that reach, that emergency management, resource management piece is enabled greatly by having a P3, public-private partnership, and especially one as well organized as Safeguard Iowa Partnership is here in Iowa. So I'm sure many of you, had whatever kind of activities in youth. Some of you probably played a lot of sports, and so you know the value of practice and scrimmaging, the ability to pull off, well, let's just all get together in the schoolyard, call some plays in the dirt and be successful, compared to let's put together a playbook. Let's get together and practice. Let's do some skill development. Those are the planning, again, add that to the tally mark of analogies here. But that's the process of doing the planning, training, and exercise as it relates to, the sports world or, those types of things where it requires you to build your skill sets, work together before game day. And that's our exercise program. It also allows us to validate, what we thought might work well in the plan and what we trained on, but, something we didn't expect changes things. We're able to correct those, write improvement plans. And I've already mentioned the after action reports and improvement planning. The other thing here, sorry, Dutch. One thing I just thought of, as you go left to right from seminars all the way to full scale exercises, I can tell you one of our pet peeves is somebody that doesn't have a plan, has never done any training, and says, we need to do a full scale exercise to see how this goes. I can almost guarantee you I'll know how that goes. It is not going to be very pretty. Sometimes luck's on our side and we'll take luck all the time. But to go right to the functional or full scale exercise without those planning efforts and the training is going to leave you with a lot of frustrated people, because they're going to be upset that things didn't go well. The other thing it has a potential to do is build bad muscle memory. Is to say, well, we got lucky that time and it worked, but is that how you really want to do it? And so the whole exercise program allows us to step through that in a sequence that is logical, that takes advantage of that, building skill sets on top of previously established skill sets. Thanks. Our duty officer responses, the graph on the left-hand side, just a 3-year snapshot. This really surprised me, actually. Dutch and Cameron crunched the numbers the first week of January and sent this to me. And I knew we were busy last year, but to have, the jump that we had from the previous year and even the jump from 2020 to 2021 was significant. This is good. We're not complaining. It gives us sort of a reassurance that you all trust us enough to call and say, hey, if I engage them, it's going to be a little bit better than it was before. So we welcome those phone calls. If you're out there doing the hard work that you are, whether it's on a single family house fire, which we were called to assist on 68 directly. It's the plus 16 is there were 16 additional single family structure fires where we were asked to provide some additional information, liaisoning with the Red Cross and some other things that we weren't directly involved with the fire, but assisted sort of after the fact. This number 8, you might not be able to see the picture very well, but it's a multi-unit apartment fire. And that number continues to grow. And I'm sure I'm not telling anybody that's in the fire service or emergency response or public safety that's something they don't know. But that's a very complicated and so complex, involved, requires a lot of services following the fire. So 8 was our number last year. I think I don't know what that particular multi-unit apartment fire, but they seem to keep growing in number. 5 hazmat, 3 the Salvation Army, mentioned them in particular, a great partner of ours, provide many of you and your folks that are out on the front lines doing that hard work in the middle of December or January when it's bitterly cold or steaming hot. They'll come out, provide some food and water. 3 utility disruptions. The 2 for, you might be able to see it might not be able to see it very well, but that's the storm path from the March 5th tornado from last year. We all, I'm sure, know about the fatalities in our neighbors to the southwest in Madison County. Fortunately, we did not have any fatalities. We had a few minor injuries and 120 some. Cameron was our damage assessment lead on that one. 120 sticks in my mind. 128 structures that were major or destroyed. So, and major means more than just cosmetic damage to the structure. So a multi-day, multi-operational period, multiple weeks event with our March 5th tornado. 2 resource management requests. And then the table on the bottom right, those are all onesies. These are just kind of things that we had one of in 2022. Livestock incident, I think that was a rollover on a livestock trailer. Car versus house, those are always interesting. I know there's a lot of car versus house incidents. I don't know why but there's a lot of them. We were asked to help on one of them. Special event, that was probably one that was a little bit out of the ordinary because I know we had more than just one special event, but one that caused us to create an incident in our incident management software system. So a lot going on. With all those disasters, they start at the local level. All disasters are local. They usually start with a 911 call to a dispatch at a dispatch center, and then a dispatcher hopping on the radio and summoning many of you in this room to go help somebody. Thousands, tens of thousands of those are occurring every year here in the metro area. Some of those escalate to a need for mutual aid. We have 3 countywide mutual aid agreements that we maintain, I guess, just as a more facilitate, I guess is probably a better word, working with many groups like the Polk County Fire Chiefs Association, Polk County Law Enforcement Executives, and a group of public works directors to make sure that we have mutual aid agreements that give us the best opportunity to receive reimbursement from the federal government should it escalate to something major. We've had previous incidents and mutual aid agreements that the language, there was a clause here or there that didn't allow us to maximize our reimbursement from FEMA. And so we worked with many of you to make sure that we were able to have that language in there that best put us in the best situation to make our organizations and our communities as whole as possible during the reimbursement process. Our duty officer rotates usually on a week-by-week basis. They're available 24/7. We appreciate the Polk County Sheriff's Office Communications Center being sort of our hub through an app on our phone. We provide them who's on call and a couple different phone numbers for backups. So at any point, just contacting your nearest public safety answering point or 911 communications center, whether it's Des Moines or Westcom or Polk County Sheriff's Office, then they can notify us if we can be of any assistance. If that escalates, we can have the discussion about, because of its complexity or duration, that we can open up the Emergency Operations Center, which gets us into a little bit different battle rhythm, I call it. And that's the next slide, Dutch, thank you. That colorful, we call it the planning P. That's basically a schedule of meetings and briefings that allow us, the collective us, all to get on the same page, is to identify what do we want to do, how are we going to do it, who's going to talk to each other, what happens if somebody gets hurt. All of those things kind of come together through a multi-step process. And at the end of the day, we end up with a incident action plan or an EOC action plan that allows us to tip the scale from being reactive to start eventually being more proactive. And so we take this big ugly problem, break it down into small parts, start solving small parts until we're getting ahead of the game. Eventually, we begin to have resources that are available to us before we need them, rather than a delay and, oh, I needed that, it's going to be 2 days before I can get it kind of situation. So this whole thing, not here to make anybody an expert in the incident action planning process, but just know that this is the most efficient way, proven by the military, proven by public safety over decades, of taking something really complicated, breaking it down into its key components, knowing who's going to solve it, when it's expected to be solved by, and communicating with each other along the route. The one thing, probably right before Dutch hit advance, sorry, is the last thing on there is we do expect to do a series of mini courses. About every 5 years, we do a 3-day or a 2-day full, like 8 hours a day. Everybody kind of here in the room, and we'll go through all of the simulation of if we had a major disaster and the EOC is activated. And so those are great. It's a great class. It's served us well. We will take advantage of those every time we can. But the feedback we heard is like, geez, it's a lot to sit down for, a 16-hour class or a 24-hour class. Can we chunk that up into smaller pieces? And so we're going to do that starting later this year, of take like an hour and a half, like 90 minutes every other month, and take a different component of that course and do it that way. So we just break it down. Hopefully it opens up a little bit more availability to all of you. We're going to try to weave that into our lunch and learn. So maybe at once a quarter that we're doing that kind of session on emergency operations centers, because it's thankfully activating an EOC is a low frequency but kind of high impact, high complexity kind of thing. And so we lose some of that muscle memory if we waited every 5 years to do that kind of work. Oh, a lot going on in this slide. So I'm not going to chase around all of the graphics here, but know that this is the escalation process with the 911 involving emergency management at some point. If there are additional resource requests, you see the Safeguard Iowa logo there. That's that public-private partnership. The State Emergency Operations Center working with the state to provide them with some damage assessment and impact assessments, so that Iowa Homeland Security and Emergency Management can describe and relate to the governor's office on the scale and magnitude of additional resources that may be needed from the state. Then the governor, again, if it rises to that level, can petition FEMA Region 7 down in Kansas City. FEMA Region 7 can contact FEMA headquarters and Department of Homeland Security, and eventually the president, to sign a presidential disaster declaration. Now, I've said that in about 45 seconds, but in reality, it's going to take anywhere from 3 days to 45 days, depending upon the urgency and what those needs are. Our job is to really advocate for all of us here at the local level to make sure that our needs are known, heard, and understood at the state level. And I can tell you that that's usually not an issue. They have been very good partners. A lot of times the challenges become on the documentation of working at the state to federal level. Each disaster seems to get a little bit better, but with each administration change at the federal level, there's a potential that changes. And I'm not making any political, right or left or red or blue kind of thing here. It's just any transition between administrations brings with it a whole new set of interpretations of federal code. We don't always have to depend upon, and we absolutely plan on being as self-sufficient as possible. We have some methods when I say we, it's as a society of insurance. Insurance is absolutely one of the biggest difference makers in my experience, is that if you walk up on that apartment fire and you ask the questions about, do you have a place to go? And do you have insurance and those kinds of questions, I can tell you that right then you'll know whether this is going to get really complicated or as simple as you can possibly make a tragedy like that. That those that have insurance obviously are better able to get back on their feet. We know that not everybody can afford, and some people just honestly don't know what kind of coverage they need. And so I looked up the other day, found on Forbes.com that that 1 in 3 Americans indicated that they could not survive a $400 emergency expense. Anybody bought a set of tires in the last couple months, couple years? You're well over that number just right there. And so it doesn't take a whole lot to push people over that edge. And that edge a lot of times may be financial, but it's also mentally and physically. And so we're trying to, wrap our community's arms around those that are suffering through that as survivors. And so many of you also in the room work with on a regular basis to provide the very basic needs: food, water, clothing, shelter. And so a way to do that during the larger scale disasters and even apartment fires, quite honestly, is this idea of a MARC, a multi-agency resource center, where we can bring those services together. Maybe not in this room, because if we're dealing with that, this room is probably busy, but identifying other locations in our community that are close to those survivors in their own neighborhoods, or provide access via transportation for those survivors to get to that multi-agency resource center, so that they can do a one-stop shop. They can walk around the room and talk with Iowa Legal Aid. They can talk with the utility companies about, when unhook the power, shut off the gas and things like that, how to get those things restored. So there's a list of probably 30 different things, and probably twice as many organizations that provide different segments of those resources available to the survivors of those disasters. And so if we can bring people together in that multi-agency resource center, it is convenient for them. They can look somebody in the eyes, talk to somebody face to face, things like language translation, interpretation services. So some really exciting things that we hope to do here. One of the things I want to mention is appreciation to the Board of Supervisors. They agreed to fund an additional position within our agency starting in July, a position we've identified as a resiliency coordinator. One of their main responsibilities will be to more formally get this MARC, this multi-agency recovery center, so that we're able to do it quickly and do it in a way that is organized, provides some overhead and structure. We've been able to pull off these multi-agency resource recovery centers in the past, but even a couple days delay in getting that up and running is a couple of days that somebody may not have food, water, shelter. So more to come on our resiliency coordinator and the MARC. Another responsibility of this position will be to begin our recovery support function planning. Our community has done a lot of planning. We've even done recovery planning, but the times that we find ourselves engaging in the recovery planning is usually after something bad has really happened or has just happened. And what do you all know about the time, the days, the weeks, even the months after a disaster? Sometimes our clarity is not 100%. Sometimes we're making decisions that we wouldn't have made on a blue sky day. And so the idea here is to look at what you all want as a community when it comes to recovery in these 5 categories: infrastructure, housing, health and social services, economic and cultural and natural affairs. So we know that there's some urgency. I don't want to say that we have all the blue sky days ahead of us to do this planning. We know there's some urgency to get it done, because I know the next disaster will be here before we want it to be. But to really take the time between disasters to think about how we want to recover before that disaster is on our doorstep. The recovery is directly related to mitigation. Whether you think about running around the track, at some point, these are going to connect. That mitigation has an impact on recovery, reduces the need to recover, enhances our ability to more quickly respond. But a lot of times we find ourselves in the best position to do mitigation right after a disaster, because then we oftentimes have that influx of federal and state assistance that we might not have had before, and we find ourselves rebuilding. And we want to make sure that our efforts during that recovery phase are applied with everything I just said about the recovery support functions, but also, more importantly, with an eye on making sure that that doesn't happen again the next time. Or if it does happen, it's not as bad, it's not as impactful. We have some great examples. We were talking just before the meeting about 4 Mile over by Easton. Some great examples that we had a flash flood in 2018. Yeah, 2018. And if you compared that damage and impact to the flash flood before that, or the flash flood before that, you will see a drastic difference. And the mayor knows, I think, very well about this, is the numbers dropped precipitously. It doesn't mean that we didn't have impacts, that we still had people there. We still had one of the most crazy rescues I've heard about occur over there during the disaster. But when you can reduce what might have been $100 million disaster down to 16 million, whatever that is, $84 million difference because of mitigation. The number that you see there at the bottom with investing 35 million, what we were talking about with Cameron just before the meeting is like, we wish we would be able to quantify the total damage avoided or impact on people's lives avoided. That's the 35 million sort of in infrastructure, tangible investments. But what was the avoided impact? And if that number could be easily calculated, I'm guessing it's close to 10 times that. Speaking of 10, thank you. We're on our glide path to being done here. Planned events, it's going to be a busy summer. We were just talking about this before the meeting started. We have March Madness coming back to town, the Ironman in June, Ragbri in July, the State Fair in August. All of those require a lot of us in the room to get together and do that work behind the scenes. And we all have a goal in mind, and that's to have the best, most enjoyable, safest event possible, but it takes a lot of work to do that. All right, exciting numbers. Here we are. So under administration and finance, just some people aren't aware that the Emergency Management Commission is identified in Iowa Code as the certifying entity. So it creates its own budget. And that budget goes through the exact same public budgeting process that you do as a city, as the county does. Part of that process is understanding the support that we depend upon. And that comes in the form of about 5 different categories. The County Board of Supervisors provide about $800,000. The cities, you all have approved a 2080 agreement for 50 cents per capita. You add that up, it's about $245,000. Our grants, Lynn Murray here I worked very closly together in the early 2000s when that number was closer to 39 million rather than 39,000. But here we are, a decade or two later, that grant money that we depend upon is really just a very small piece of the pie. We appreciate it, but it is a relatively small piece. And then we have a 2080 agreement with the 911 Service Board that provides for the 911 coordinator's salary and benefits to the tune of about $119,000. If you want to look at that in a table, you can see the specific numbers here. By the way, if you have questions about, we've categorized these to save you from eye strain of looking at what all of the subunits are of our budget. But if you are interested in that, We'd be more than happy to send you to provide a printed copy. However, we need to, as much detail as you want until your questions are answered, we can provide that. But this is just a quick summary of our proposed budget that'll be considered next Wednesday at the commission meeting. And I know we have several mayors in the room. This is one of those meetings where we depend upon you as an elected official that provides that vote on that budget. Obviously, the clear accountability between you as an elected official and the communities you represent and your constituents. But the consideration of this budget will be next Wednesday at 2 o'clock right here. Shift gears just a little bit on 911 Service Board. It is a separate legal entity. It is governed by a separate section of Iowa Code. The membership of the 911 Service Board does have some similarities to the Emergency Management Commission, but it is distinct and different. The county sheriff serves on the 911 Service Board, as does the Board of Supervisors. The Emergency Management Agency is named as a member of that board, as well as the police chief that has a 911 center in their jurisdiction. And then the bulk of those members come from a representative from each municipality that has a public safety agency that responds within that jurisdiction. So, there's a lot of law enforcement and fire that are represented there in the room during the 911 Service Board meetings. There is some relationship, a very good relationship, and some overlap between the Service Board and Emergency Management. And that's because in both sections of Iowa Code, it lists certain parts of emergency communications as a responsibility. And so we have, as an agency, with a 911 coordinator on our staff and emergency management being accountable to both the commission and the 911 Service Board, allows us to try to do that in the most efficient way possible. A part of doing that is the 2080 agreement that we have between the two entities that provides for the salary and benefits of the 911 coordinator. You can see there the duties of the 911 coordinator. It is sometimes it's easier to say what Tracy doesn't do than what she actually does do. Some people that, well, does she have supervision over any dispatchers or dispatch centers? And the answer is no. Our work here is more at a strategic level. Again, that partnership, facilitating a process that allows us to leverage the capabilities, tools, and techniques of our 3 local public safety answering points together. The 911 Service Board does and has a responsibility to produce a budget each year, along with public hearing and all of that stuff. So there's a lot of joint projects and public outreach. There's a couple committees that serve underneath the 911 Service Board, the Metro Interoperability Committee, which does probably what you think it does. It sits down and says, we've got all of these communication tools. How do we make them work together as best we can? Go ahead, Dutch, please. A couple of exciting tools that we want to ask you to help us promote. I know a number of you do already, but one is the Polk County Alert Iowa. This is the system that allows either any of the 3 dispatch centers or our agency to send a text message, phone call out to anybody in Polk County that has registered for the system. We used to be able to say, hey, anybody that's got a registered telephone line will get this. Well, how many of you right now have a landline? Yeah, are there any hands? Maybe 1 or 2. And it's great, but what it means for us on using this system is that it requires somebody to take some action to be able to sign up and register themselves to receive the alert. And so we're asking people to push that the link out to make sure that everybody that wants to has the opportunity to sign up for those alerts. The other system is really kind of the mirrored image of this, and that's called Rapid SOS. This is a system, again, that people have to register for to a certain extent. But if you have, what's the Apple Health profile on your Apple device, it's already kind of in there. But we ask that people go to this Rapid SOS and sign up, especially if you have a medical condition, if you have any special circumstances that you want to pass along to the dispatch center, because if you call 911 or are not able to talk, or become incapacitated and that line is open with the dispatch center, they can look at that profile if you've signed up for this system. And it might say, hey, oh, we know AJ is a diabetic, or as we've had examples of a lot of different things. But it can provide some additional details to the dispatcher, and then obviously the dispatcher can share that with your responders that are going out to provide assistance. And so the link is there. We ask you to, any opportunity that you have to push that through your social media, web pages, link it back, push people back to our page to sign up for those would be much appreciated. On the 911 budgeting process, I'm going to step through this quickly, but if you have any additional questions, please feel free to stick around or contact Tracy or I afterwards. Is that we have basically 3 revenue sources for the 911 service board. One is a surcharge on your landlines, and at the little informal survey I just did, only a couple hands went up, so that means that those numbers are going down every day, every week, every quarter. We get less and less surcharge from landlines. Because we're in a growing metro area, the second piece of that revenue stream is a surcharge that each of us pay $1 a month on our cell phones. And so that's available to the 911 service board. And the last is smaller category on grants and interest earned on accounts and things like that. So it's and so the surcharge revenue is the major piece. When that number, which is about $2.9 million annually, the service board has established a policy goal of a catastrophic reserve fund equal to 25% of its annual operating expenses. And so until that goal is made, each year, the service board sets aside about 5%, which equals about $146,000. At that point, there are some joint projects which are a benefit and shared amongst all 3 of our local PSAPs. You can see the list of joint projects in the middle on the screen on the left-hand side. Those are things like 911 telephone lines, advertising and promotion, the rapid SOS system I just talked about, Mix and Rhino. Again, if you have questions, please stick around. We'll share what those are. But those are things that are available and are expenses that would have to be paid by the individual PSAPs, but there's some efficiencies and cost savings by doing that together as a joint project. And so those are taken off the next piece of that budget, the joint projects, just under $400,000 in this upcoming year. And then the administration of the service board, which is largely that 2080 agreement, and some other things like insurance and things that add up to about $172,000. At that point, the remaining balance is, there's a formula that's applied so that we distribute funding to the 3 PSAPs in an equitable way. And that formula is a 60% base amount. So we take 60% of that amount and divide it by 3, and each of the PSAPs get a base amount. Then we take 33% of the next bucket is allocated based on the number of 911 calls received by that PSAP. And then the last 8% is allocated based on population served within that PSAP's service area. So that may sound complicated, but what happens is on the pie chart on the right-hand side, you can see there that our 3 local PSAPs, Westcom's receiving about $630,000, the Polk County Sheriff's Office a little over $660,000, and the Des Moines PSAP just under $900,000. The catastrophic reserve fund you can see there in the joint project. So that's the balance of the amount that comes into the service board's budget and how it's allocated. If you want to see the next table is the specific numbers there. Again, those are the same numbers you should have seen on the pie chart on the right, on the previous slide. And so I want to end on some exciting news. I know we're 1 minute over. I appreciate your patience and sticking around. Really, Dutch is doing a tremendous job of leading and facilitating a CAD to CAD project. were able to receive just under $5 million, 18, 16 months ago. And working with all three of the PSAPs, the 911 Service Board, to really take the computer-aided dispatching system, which CAD stands for, the computer-aided dispatch system, to the absolute next level. I said, I've been doing this since about 2004, and with interoperability of radio systems, that next evolution is the interoperability of the computer-aided dispatch systems, the information management hub that sits, behind the scenes and allows different agencies to see where other units are and to facilitate information sharing. If you're driving down the interstate, I always use, I almost pointed at Chief McCluskey, my old Windsor Heights days, but Windsor Heights is always my classic example, right? So if you're going through Windsor Heights on 235, by the time you make a phone call and it hits a tower, you might be connecting to Des Moines, or going the other way, it might be Westcom. Now they're all in Westcom, so it kind of solves that problem. But that example used to be, what was our classic ability for our dispatch centers, not only to be able to talk with each other on public safety radios, but to be able to communicate with each other and share information as fast as those electrons can go, rather than the old days of having to pick up the phone and literally one dispatcher calling another dispatcher to relay information. We've got awesome dispatchers, but you can see there the potential of time delays, information, just key entry, a whole lot of things. So that's really going to put our CAD systems on a trajectory to be state of the art. They've already started to do some testing on some certain things. So that's really, really exciting for us. You can see kind of the breakdown of that $5 million on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side is really what I talked about, but I didn't really highlight, is that 94% of the total revenue received by the service board goes out to the three PSAPs in the form of operational support. So some really exciting things in our future. And I say our, it's the collective our. All right, I think that brings me to the end, and I apologize for taking you a little bit over, but if there are questions, comments, suggestions, critiques.
I'll give her critique. No, I'm not going to give her a critique. I just wanted to take a quick moment to state a couple of things, just to state the obvious. I've been here long enough to see a lot of elected officials and senior appointed officials have their first time to be here being a time of disaster or significant event. And throughout all the different conversations, what I've learned is familiarity is the one thing that can reduce the level of stress, that instead of having to walk in here thinking, I need to make some big decisions and this is hard. One of the things that can help is state the obvious. When you go home tonight or wherever you're going to go back to, you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here kind of a thing. Tell somebody you've been in the EOC, because that's the one thing we never say. We take it for granted. This is the EOC that can be set up in many different ways. It's not foreign. It's not something that's out in magical space. This is where it is. And the way that you can get familiar with it and what the entire agency staff is, to use the words of the late, great Rick Moody, if you don't eat, you're going to die. Those lunch and learns are a great free opportunity to spend some time familiar with the surroundings, familiar with the staff. You can learn everything that was on that chart if you choose, but if nothing else, you'll learn the language and you'll be more confident. And that familiarity and that confidence, more often than not, for elected officials in particular, senior appointed staff, and division heads from your communities that wouldn't normally be here, that's what makes them effective here. Otherwise, they'll show up and they'll stand in clumps of people that they know because they're familiar, and they'll wait for someone else to do something when this is really a collaborative space and the success comes from that. So you're in the EOC, tell someone else. If they say, why are you telling me that? Say, because if you have any questions about it, I know who I can call to get the answers to, and you can start your own conversation about getting familiar. You'd be surprised if the first time you show up here is an hour and a half after 9 inches of rain hit the metro area in 3 hours. That's a pretty stressful time. It's a good time to see familiar faces in a space you're familiar with, knowing that I'm not sure what my job is, but I know that I'm going to have a list of things I can engage in when I get there, as opposed to people calling you because you're elected and you go, I have no idea. That's a tough place to be. We can make this the most user-friendly emergency management space probably in the state of Iowa. And if that takes all of us willing to eat a lunch, say hi, come to anything, or even stop by, even if you don't want to come in a group, just to poke around and say, I wasn't comfortable asking my questions in a group, but I'm kind of curious. I'm newly elected here, or I'm newly appointed there. How do I plug in? Staff's more than willing to help.
While you're all thinking of your next question, just a follow up on that is the role that you're in, whether you are a leader in an appointment within a first responder agency, that operational knowledge that you have, that's needed here. If you're an elected official, the guidance, the direction, the intent, the connectivity to your constituents, that's needed here. And so sometimes our overcoming that hesitancy of coming to the EOC is to understand that we're here, our staff and those of us that work here every day are to help you get in the right lane to do the job that you were either hired to do or elected to do. And it's our job to ask you those questions, to understand the elected officials' intent and the relationship that you have with your constituency and residents of your communities. But then to leverage the subject matter expertise that you have as operators, the people that have been out there doing the law enforcement, the fire, the public works, the human and social service organizations, the charities, all of that other stuff that also is so critical to have in this room. Other questions? Thank you, Chief. Questions, comments?
I just have another comment. I'll relate to all of you, especially the ones that maybe haven't been here as long as AJ or the chief over here. But I remember in 2008, we had a little bit of a flood issue here. And we responded, we came together, we organized the center. Actually, we did it a little across the street over here. But we came together, we thought together, we planned together. And after the water receded, we immediately went in and started organizing recovery. We were out with our fire department, everybody else. We were cleaning streets, we were cleaning houses. We got people back in their houses. I will tell you, without naming a specific community, but there's one a little east of us and a little north of us that also had severe flooding. They waited. Now, I will say that there were these guys here that had signs around their neck that said FEMA on them, and they went around and we thought they were here to kind of help us. Well, apparently they were just note takers at that moment because they weren't a lot of help. I'll just say that. I won't force you to say it, but we responded. We did it. That other city that was a little further east of us, some federal funds they felt required pre-authorization to get them. Now, we had all kinds of federal agencies that had to respond to this, everything from DOT to whatever. They waited 18 months before they started recovering or did a full recovery, to the point where that city, which again will go unnamed, was using Kaibos in the middle of the street 18 months after the event. We had everybody back because of the planning and because of the preparation that happened starting in the EOC, in all the cities, all the towns, all the departments. Our emergency responders work together. So thanks for everything you do. Let's keep coordinating and working together. I will ask one question, and hopefully we're gonna, it didn't end up being a disaster, but could have been, and some of us got some very negative calls. There was a situation where we had a very severe cold spell went through here very recently, and the note that we put out, we said, well, go to CIS and go to here for shelter, but there were unsheltered individuals who were out on the street, and we kept referring them to Polk County Emergency Management. and there was not a response. We need to plan together how we're going to respond to that specific kind. I know we look at weather events, usually storms and derechos and tornadoes and floods and that kind of thing. But this is also one where some very specific people are in very dire straits in an emergency situation, and we need to make sure we have a plan. And I still think that Polk County EOC is where they at least ought to get direction and have somebody able to give them direction.
And with that, so the planning process has been engaged on that, working with the Homeless Coordinating Council. Emergency Support Function 6 has the extreme temperature plan in there. Many of the groups that were critical of that had been engaged in the planning process. And so I appreciate what you're saying, and we would love to have them share their concerns and their ideas during the planning process so that we can act on them during the response. And so we will continue to engage with them, try to get them to engage with us. I think that there are resources in the community. SIS does a great job of sending people out to identify people that are without homes, to invite them back to not only SIS, but Bethel Mission, to take advantage of the warming centers that almost all of your communities have identified in their centers. I'm sure there are ways that we can improve. At the time, Dutch was one of the duty officers during that. I kind of took over the smaller, kind of on the back end of that. But the calls that were received were talking about they have no place to go. And we didn't hear of any capacity limitations. So we need to identify what are the barriers that are inhibiting somebody to take advantage of the resources that are available, I guess is the best way I would say that.
I'd like to make a comment on that, Moss. One of the things that we ran into on that, because the cold snap fell on Christmas weekend, a lot of the warming centers that we would normally use were facilities that are open to the public most days. So the challenge that we had is they were closed for the holiday weekend. So trying to get those folks to extend the hours. Then on top of that, a natural blizzard that weekend. So even those centers that were going to be open, some of them got closed because of the blizzard. So they didn't have staff to make it in. Just no pun intended, but a perfect storm of bad situations that all came together on that one weekend. And I took many of those calls myself, sir, and completely understand where you're coming from. I was able to work through at least the planning process with a lot of these folks. Once they understood the planning process, most of them they at least understood what the situation was. But it was a difficult situation that we had to work through.
Yeah, we want to be careful not to be defensive about it, because I'd be a hypocrite if I'd stand up here and say, hey, we just do all these after actions. That's the kind of feedback we're always looking for to improve upon those. But a lot of times there is more, to the story. And you guys have done this long enough, you understand how that works, but we'll be always with our ears open and eyes open.
Just to speak to that, I personally, during that time, went out and around my neighborhood, I live downtown, and asked, hey, how can we get you somewhere? I was willing to work with Dart to help them get to the bus. But there are some people that are so deathly afraid of going in to any type of facility that there's not a single answer that I can find right now, but from working with those that are unsheltered or those that are limited capacity, we need to find a way to build our relationship with them first before an event like that happens, in my opinion, because there's no way that that's going to be able to continue. If someone's afraid, that's what's going to happen.
Take on you a little bit, Joe. For those that don't know, Joe's with DMARC, so another one of our great partners. Absolutely, we talk about trust, being that it has to start there, and I think that's what I'm taking from what you just shared. Yep. Other questions, comments, concerns? again, please feel free if you need to go, want to go. We're not holding you here. Appreciate your time here, but we're happy to stay as long as you have questions. Okay. Thank you, everybody. Take care. Be safe.